Awesome. Okay, it's 1 and 1 and time to get started. So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be hosting this session with Rohan today. Our topic being Robo HR, the rise of AI and automation in the workplace. Almost sounds like the rise of machines. So I'm Kaanu Joshi. I'm the head of technology at tilr, and I'm glad to be hosting this event with Rohan. Rohan has been in the Toronto tech scene for almost 12 years now. In various roles, he's a technology leader, he's been a software developer, he's also an angel investor, and some would say LinkedIn troll. he's currently the head of engineering at Nautica Commerce, an e-commerce marketplace platform. Welcome, Rohan.
Thank you for having me.
Did I miss something?
Nah. I only troll Leah, though. That's the one thing.
Okay. I should have said that. Okay, amazing. Okay, so this topic is really exciting, and especially in this past 6 months, I think now we're hearing AI as much as we hear about probably iPhones when iPhones came out. So everybody knows about it. Everybody has some opinion about it. So let me start this off by asking you some rapid fire questions. What book are you reading or listening to right now?
Right now, actually, this is a great question. I'm reading Children of Time by, I forget the author's name, but basically, I'm really into science fiction, and science fiction is, especially science fiction that's talking about AIs, is my current interest. And so highly endorse everybody reading fiction. Sorry, not nonfiction, reading fiction, and much more fun.
Awesome. Well, I also love sci-fi, as you know, and Leah recommended this book, AI 2041 by Kai-Fu Lee and Chen Qifan, and it's amazing. And what's good about this book is that it has 10 different stories from all across the world, and with every story, it increases the complexity of how AI would work with humanity. And the author gives us a background of what those technologies or those technical terms mean. So it's like a great book for someone who knows the technical terms, and even a great book for people who don't know what things mean. He goes into talking about algorithms and deep learning and stuff, but in really, really, layman terms. So great book, AI 2041. Plus, I'm reading 2 other books, since I'm always reading 3 books at a time.
Yeah, I'm reading 5 books at a time. I forgot the other 4.
Okay, I didn't want to sound crazy. Okay. Okay, next one. Popular AI. Is it a gift from influencers or from scientists and engineers?
I think that's an interesting question. I think the technology comes from scientists and engineers. I think all the hype comes from VCs and influencers.
Okay. What are the top 3 ways you see end users adopting AI in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the 3 bits of low-hanging fruit. One is search. I think we're seeing this in the market, but Google search is going to die out as the primary way that people seek information. I think already I'm using ChatGPT for a lot more search stuff and a lot more documentation parsing and whatnot. And so I think you'll have a much better search methodology because it'll be contextualized to the actual language that you're speaking, as opposed to trying to do some keywords. So I think that's a major one. I think the second one is going to be in process automation. So we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. So I'm not going to go talk too much about that. And the third piece, I think, is really going to be in automotives. I'm a massive believer that we're going to see far more technologies utilizing computer vision, moving towards self-driving. But I think that'll be the other major frontier. And that's probably the more interesting frontier than language models as well right now. But we don't talk about it too much because nobody's been able to put out a proper self-driving car except for Waymo in San Francisco right now.
True. I think I do agree with the search part of it, because I think I'm using more of ChatGPT myself, especially because it gives me a little more context than just a list of hundreds of links on Google search, which I have to individually click and read through. So yeah, I think we probably are going to see more of that. And this next question really is probably a personal question, but also probably the one that haunts every technologist. When will code write itself?
I think code is already writing itself. I
Okay.
think GPT 3.5 really, I think, changed that. I think that GPT 3 was, it was more like a brand new developer. This new version, the new stuff, the new models have been far more robust. And so I tend to use GPT to write code on a daily basis. I think a lot of developers are using GitHub's autopilot.
Mhm.
And deeper than that, though, I do think we're going to move into a scenario where like front end UI stuff is going to be automated heavily. I think we're already hitting that gate. But I think this also is different than saying that architecture is being done properly, and different than saying prioritization is being done, and different than saying there's clever ingenuity coming in. And so I think strong developers are always going to be in demand. I think we're just now closing the gap on a major amount of software teams, software roles that could never be filled. Because there wasn't enough people with software training. But now I think that's been changed heavily by these GPT models and other code-based models. And it's just going to augment every single developer, basically.
Cool. Will AI become more personal in the next 5 years, say as a counselor, as a friend, as a mentor?
Yes, I think we're gonna see a world, and I think we're gonna see this in our lifetime, where everybody's got an AI companion. And the everybody part, I think we should put an massive asterisk there. Like everybody in the rich parts of the world will have the ability to do that. And I think it's gonna just enhance it's just gonna widen the stratification between poorer economies and richer economies. And so that, and then like I think Neuralink is in FDA trials now, human FDA trials. So like we're also going to have brain implants with a language model talking to us at all points in time. And I think it'll be tailored to the individual's experiences in the individual's life.
Absolutely. I'm just going to dial back a little bit to what Karen just messaged on the chat doesn't this just mean that developers will still be required? It's just the work will evolve and that they will need to know what to ask ChatGPT. To which I'm going to add one more thing of my own, is there going to be a new skill requirement called AI whisperer?
Yeah, I think prompt engineering is already a major skill that like people are building out. I see this manifesting in two different ways. Like one, it's the same thing actually, I think that Googling used to be. I think instead of being able to be a strong Googler, which is I think one of the core skill sets of a strong developer, now it'll be prompt engineering, right? It'll be like, how can I get the right answer out? And then the other side that I'm really seeing is like there's different levels of talent or quality that I'm seeing in terms of how people are dealing with language prompts. And I see this heavily with generative art, Midjourney, where some people I know can just like build these incredible prompts that turn into these incredible images. And I for one have not been able to crack that yet. So like one of my teammates, I've now called him the Midjourney Whisperer, and so I try to get him to teach me all the little tricks that he's got, and I still haven't been able to replicate his level of quality on prompts. But in terms of ChatGPT, that one I'm strong at, because I think for developers, it's like, how do we ask the right specific question with the pedanticism that comes with being a software developer, and then you can get a just really strong answer back.
Cool. AI will lead to large-scale job reassignment, yes or no?
Yes, but I think this one comes with a major caveat that, like, I think for the past 10 years, a lot of people have been saying that we need to move towards, especially capitalist Western economies, moving towards a place where there's guaranteed income for people. I think we're going to get to the point where we're going to be able to automate so much stuff that jobs aren't really going to exist in the same way that we think about them right now. And I mean, like, we can talk about this from a philosophical level, political science level. And it really is like, we can go back to like Marx, we can go back to Marx writing about capital, where like the final state is when we have so much abundance that nobody needs to work to go get goods, right? I think that's where automation is going to take us at some point in time. There's just a lot of different hurdles to cross on that. And then a lot of different political fights, culture wars, all that. I think we're starting to see the emergence of all of this, but I think fundamentally we're going to change how human beings live and how human beings deal with their day-to-day.
Cool. And then I think a question that probably, is probably in everybody's mind ever since Hollywood started making movies about intelligent machines. Will AI machines be the dominant species on Earth in the next 50 years?
No, I don't think we have the compute power for that. 50 years, no. I think when we get to quantum computing, when we can really start looking at probabilistic structures as opposed to linear structures in the way that we currently do, that is probably the point in time where things are going to start getting scary. But I think right now the biggest problem is that we as a human species doesn't generate enough energy to power these massive artificial general intelligence super machines. And then on top of that, like, NVIDIA still is raking in massive amounts of profit until NVIDIA starts becoming a utility and the cost of machine learning training goes down. There's no reality. And I don't think that's going to happen in the next 25 years to 50 years at all. I think after that, we'll start really looking at the economies of scale of the hardware side.
Okay. So that's a pretty reassuring answer, I think. Okay, so let's get on with our topic. Now, before we delve into AI and automation and then AI and automation in the workplace, who are the players in the AI and machine learning landscape? Now, we know that scientists and engineers are on one end of the spectrum, and then end users are on the other end of the spectrum. Who are the other players in this landscape?
So let's separate scientists and engineers really quickly too. Okay. I think scientists, we need to really qualify that. It's mathematicians, right? Like at the end of the day, machine learning AI is statistics at a massive scale, aided by computers. So I think building new algorithms, building new techniques, that's going to come out of academia still. That's going to come out of U of T. That's going to come out of Stanford. It's going to come out of a few other schools, as it has been for the past 60 years. Okay. So I think science is always going to lead the way. Science and math is always going to lead the way on new techniques. Then I think engineering comes in a different manner. I think that the biggest part of machine learning companies these days is not the actual science bit. It's the how do we get all this data properly put into a warehouse? How do we actually do our training jobs? And how do we do this in a cost-effective manner? So I think that's the engineering side right now that we're really seeing major leaps ahead of. The technologies that we're seeing are not actually that monumental in terms of future progress. I think in 20 years, we're going to look back and some of the crazy ideas that are coming out of U of T, Jeff Hinton's lab, something like that, are going to translate into massive things. But right now, we still need them to prove it out, and then engineers can start building up those systems. So if the spectrum is like from here to here, science and academia way over here, then we have engineers. And then in the middle of that is the companies like an OpenAI or like a Cohere, where they do have a research function, and it's a research function that isn't coupled to their revenue generation functions. And so I think we have this new research lab sort of scenario as well. We're still more applied science, but they are doing some of the early academia stuff, some of the other aspects there. After that, I think the next most important party are the investors, the people who are actually funding these. As you said at the beginning, like I think VCs are the ones driving a lot of.
I was looking at the time and I'm like, oh, maybe, yeah. But
I think VCs are a lot of.
It's kind of exciting.
All right, there we go. Yeah, and so VCs are going to fund this thing, and all right.
Okay, let's give it a minute. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, so I think VCs are the ones driving a lot of the hype right now, and I think investors are going to be the major factor. Even with OpenAI right now, like Microsoft is calling the shots. They own 49%. They put in a few $1 billion. They are driving the most, or they are gaining the most amount of value within their own systems. Yeah. So I think VCs are there. And then after that, I think we're looking more into society and policymakers, politicians. I think right now we're going to see a significant amount of interest in trying to corral AI. We're going to see massive missteps. We've already seen one massive misstep where the EU has put some extremely bizarre methodologies on how they're going to assess AI risk. which to me always is like, great, here's a bunch of politicians who are just capitalizing on something for the sake of getting reelected and not actually understanding the fundamental pieces. But I think at a different level, there's a much more nuanced conversation happening out of Silicon Valley, where these investors and these entrepreneurs are now engaging heavily with Congress, engaging heavily with other political structures to really work out a framework of regulatory framework and really understanding how we can prevent a lot of damage being done to humans, to society, and I think to the human species in general. And then between that and end users, I think then we have like the applied ML companies. I think it's things like Apple coming in and saying, hey, great, we're going to overhaul all the different systems. Apple doesn't really do a whole lot of machine learning research and all that, but I think they apply it really well, or they will apply it really well. I think over time, we're going to see a lot of those service providers pull things in. And then I think we get to financial services and then end users. And I think financial services can be the last one to really take on AI stuff just out of pure risk fears. But I think that's the last frontier, and then it's end users.
Right, and there's the one favorite group of people that I always like to add, and that's influencers. And I just use that term very loosely, though.
Yes, the ones who are writing Twitter threads about how to do a better prompt, and it's the exact same thread over and over again. They will be replaced by language models.
Well, that is nice to know. Okay.
Knock on wood.
Okay. Okay. So what are some potential areas where AI can be used in HR operations?
Automation.
Mhm.
I think, and this is a conversation I was having with our recruitment lead even this week. I think the major piece is really, let's automate all the different disparate steps that come in during a recruiting life cycle. And so I was saying to Jess, our lead, the other day, like for her, my suggestion would have been go use GPT to go generate all the sorts of candidate outreach emails. And then a lot of these emails are administrative in nature, right? So it's like scheduling emails and all that. Those things can be automated completely. And then we were just going to go build some little integrations into Lever to automate our entire process. And really, this, I think, is the frontier that HR is going to have to deal with over the next 10 years. Like, it's going to be a lot more automation. It's going to be a lot fewer humans needed in the loop, because I think we're going to get much more accurate about hiring. And I think we're also going to get much more accurate about data collection, which will lead to better models and lead to a different way of doing hiring. And I think like there's things you can do right now where it's like engineering technical evaluations, I think, can probably be automated completely with the language model. I think even small things like intro conversations can be had with the language model and a candidate just chatting, and then understanding better how they can tailor themselves to the job, to the role, or even if they're a fit, or like the top of funnel opting out, the top of funnel ruling out, et cetera. Like, I think it's going to make it a little bit easier in the near term to actually have a strong pipeline at all points in time. And I think, like, for hiring managers especially, this is going to be impactful because we're going to be in far fewer intro meetings that don't end up in an offer. I think we're going to go ramp up that percentage of people who are in the pipeline who get to the end, because we'll be able to start pattern matching on much more than just human biases, or much more than just a random conversation.
Right. So that's the recruitment part of it. How about let's say in retention, like helping managers understand who's going to potentially you're going to lose this guy, potentially like the first one to go, and or employee wellness.
I think that's already happened pre-AI. Pre-machine learning stuff. I think that last few years, like I've had a slew of tools and many more salespeople talking to me about performance management, talking to me about different solutions on how to track flow state, how to do this, that, and the other in terms of engineering team progress, cadence, and whatnot. So I think like the data-driven aspects that we've taken on over the last few years, especially in tech, that is translated into a lot of the management functions, being allowed to be automated. I think with machine learning, we can get better models, but I don't know if it can go really beyond that. I think at the end of the day, we still need that human in the loop in especially with high performance jobs. We need that human in the loop to actually handle human problems. And I think management has become handling human problems as opposed to handling hard skill problems. And so, yeah, and like I think this is gonna be my thesis overall. Like I think when human ingenuity and human interaction need to happen, the language model is never going to be able to fully replace something. Obviously, some people are going to phone in their jobs and they can be replaced, but I think at the end of the day, in high performance cultures, you can't do that. I think the risk though is in cultures that aren't about individual performers or individual performances, more rote jobs. So things like call centers, things like customer service jobs. I think we've already seen the impact of those things being moved into automation. And I think the management of those functions is also going to end up being heavily automated. And I think like to me, I just have weird, not nightmares necessarily, but like weird concerns about like all the outsourced support teams sitting in Bangalore. And like, it's gonna, I think, wreck economies like that, when a lot of these massive companies say, hey, we don't actually want to pay for the human, we're just going to pay like the $20 a month to OpenAI. That's where I think the real disruption is going to come to management and HR.
Okay. Now, there have been talks or there are use cases about applying it to, the day-to-day HR management functions. And so AI in employee appraisal and promotion decisions. Right? What do you think about fairness and accuracy? Especially because, I mean, quite a few of us have seen not so great people leaders.
Yeah, so funny story. My first company, one of the things that I was trying to work on was I was trying to apply natural language processing to Slack logs and all sorts of company information, like the collaboration information. And we're talking 2015, so like nowhere near this current generation. And the big thing we were trying to figure out is how we can protect against scenarios where the wrong person is either allowed to leave or is let go. And this is back to performance management, but one of the big things that I'd observed at companies and that we'd realized during our user interviews was that there's always some people in the company who, by any overt measure, are underperforming. But when you actually understand the company culture and you actually understand the actual calculus of how everybody's working together, these are people who are underperforming on those the KPIs, OKRs, whatnot, because they're actually the glue people. They're the ones who know where all the things are happening. They're the ones who are keeping track of everybody. And like, those are things that I think are really, really hard for any database system to actually capture. So we didn't succeed in that company because we basically disproved our own thesis. We validated our own thesis. But I think what we'll get over time is that we'll have scenarios where fair compensation or fair remuneration structures or fair bonus structures and all that are going to be easier to do. I think right now it's more challenging just because there's a little bit more math involved, but I don't think it's an overall large thing. I think it's just that the scale of it necessitates more and more people to go handle the size of the problem. I think with machine learning or with AI, so to speak, we're going to be able to augment that individual person who is handling a lot of the decisions, giving them the ability to actually capture more data and make decisions off better data. So I don't know if that impact is actually going to automate everything, but at the same point in time, I also am a healthy skeptic that large companies are actually going to think about things with this much thoughtfulness. I think a large company is going to go, oh shit, we can lower our costs immensely. And then they're going to go force through stuff. And then they're probably going to end up having a lot of people leave, but they probably don't care, right? These are probably the companies where like everybody's fungible. You can slot anybody in. And so this is also where I'm like, there's a difference that's going to come from these cultures where it's just much more like rote and the job description is exactly what you're doing day in, day out versus the stuff that I think we do in like software startups where every day is like ingenuity, creativity, and beating our head against keyboard until something that has never been created is created.
Right. Yeah, I think it makes total sense because there are these really large companies where their appraisal cycle starts like 3 months before the actual appraisal happens. They're so huge and they go through so many administrative tasks, like just to compare people across the organization and decide who gets what kind of situation.
Yeah, and like I think those cultures come up because of the incentive structures as well. And I think this is where we're going to see a difference in how humans work in a few years. But like the incentive structures right now, what they're really rewarding is people seeming like they're doing work. Right? Like I've done a lot of work consulting with one of the big 5 banks. It might be one of the top 2 ones. And like one of the things that really shocked me internally was once you get above the director level, you're no longer required to be good at your job. You're required to be good at politics. You need to be seen to be touching certain projects, et cetera. And so it incentivizes people to put no real thought into the impact and the long term of those, the decisions that they make. And so I fear like we're going to have a scenario where there's going to be a ton of different people who are just to get a promotion, they're just going to go sign off on a particular project. They're never even going to be part of the implementation of that project. They're going to sign off on a project, get promoted somewhere else. And then this bad idea, which nobody can really remove themselves from, is going to be left there and implemented. And I think it's going to happen like banks, insurance companies, and all that, until they realize like, wait, this is not how we actually make money. We actually make money on regulatory capture. But now all of our people are leaving because we botched this entire machine learning scenario. And yeah, it's probably already happening in a much more prominent manner than I'm even giving it credit, because I'm not paying that much attention to it. But like in healthcare, we saw this happening. The first forays into healthcare AI ended up being absolutely atrocious. There's this one EMR, which is the main operating system for physicians. Patient notes go in there, billing codes come out of that. That's how the entire economics of a hospital or a health system works. So there's this one company, Epic. Epic is like the largest EMR in the world. Every doctor friend of mine tells me horror stories. I've been trained on Epic. It's the worst UI I've ever seen. But Epic tried to move into computer-assisted models. And so they were trying to do sepsis models. And they just phoned in something. They just put out some random crap. And those sepsis models are actually worse than the mathematical, like actuarial models that physicians were using as normal standard of care. And that's set back ML for a long time because we're just this botched implementation. Like there was lies being done there. Like I was at the time I was working for a company and we were building and putting out machine learning models into hospitals. And so we would see Epic stuff and we'd always have to combat the questions of like, what can you do that Epic can't do? And we're like, Epic isn't actually doing machine learning. They're telling you that they're just running some shitty Excel models somewhere. But they're selling you computer-assisted coding. They're selling you a bunch of these different things, but they don't have the data sets in place. Right? So it's like these things are this is what's gonna happen, I think, over the next few years. We're gonna see a whole bunch of different corporations, the soulless corporations, I think, and that's not to say that they're evil, but it's just that like, it's just people doing their jobs. It's the banality of bureaucracy, and that's gonna really push through tons of terrible policies by people who don't actually understand what they're doing. Rather, they're doing it just to get a promotion because they thought it was very hyped up, and it's hyped up because they're reading the VCs going, this is going to change the world, when the VCs are out to lunch on every matter.
Absolutely.
So this is, I think, what's going to happen. I think it's going to happen at a societal scale as well. And I'm most worried when governments start moving into AI ML stuff, because these are not meritocracies at this point in time, right? It's like whoever gets elected, they're just going to have random populist ideas and saying, we're going to use ML for this, and it's going to botch a whole bunch of different things. Although I will say Taiwan is going to be the one thing that's different, because they actually have a chief digital officer who knows what she's doing.
So, there's this, you've oft repeated this, that the way that we see or perceive or do our jobs is fundamentally going to change in the future. And I think that's something that's really good to know, rather than just having a blind statement that people are going to lose their job, or things are going to get more efficient, or everything is going to go haywire.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the lose their job things. I think we need to put that into a proper perspective as well. I think right now we're seeing tech getting decimated in terms of jobs, but at the same point in time, the US is sitting at like 3% unemployment, right? And like natural rate of unemployment is like 5 to 6%. Like we're seeing like record full employment in the US. It's not in tech jobs, and like whatever, we're going to go cycle to different companies. There's going to be layoffs, and like I think tech really stacked up people over the last few years, and this is just a correction. We're back on the same path. And if you look at the market, we're back on the same trend. But I think like the fears of people losing their jobs en masse it's not properly founded. I think that the risk or at least the explanations that people have, and the risks and the fears that they have are slightly calculated incorrectly. They're mispricing their risk if I'm going to put my old VC hat on. But like, I think the thing is like a lot of people are going to find that their roles are eliminated, but not their actual career functions. Right.
Oh.
And then I think, and people have already said this in the chat, but like people have to like learn new skills and they'll have to learn other things on how to automate their jobs better. But if you think about it, we've been doing that for the past 30, 40 years, right? Like since the internet has come in place, we've been doing that. Every few years, we have a new platform to build on top of, whether it's iPhones, whether it's ML, whether it's quantum, whether it's M1 MacBooks, right? Like there's always a new platform. People have to go change what they have to do. I think what happened in tech over the last, actually tech is probably about 50 years, but like within software tech or hardware tech, we are always continuously evolving. I think now that's going to turn into the entire economy. Every single function is going to be always continuously evolving. Right. And I think people are going to find different jobs and they're going to find more creative jobs. And ideally, in my perfect world, people will find jobs that they find rewarding and impactful because you're freed up to do more interesting things and given the ability to have a much bigger impact in a smaller slice of the pie. But like the value of that impact will be much higher. I think we're going to go in that direction, but that does take a little bit of idealism and a little bit of hope that it'll go that direction.
Okay. Okay, but that's pretty reassuring, especially because there are always like two views and always two opposing views. One is this, oh, humanity is just gonna go like it's really, upward. It's gonna go, everything's gonna be amazing. And the other is the doomsday kind of a situation that people talk about.
We've seen doomsday for Microsoft Excel. We've seen doomsday for typewriters. We've seen doomsday for printing press. We've seen doomsday for like a variety of things. I think if you are a student of history, which I'm an absolute history nerd, I know you are as well, because that's what we talk about when we're in cars. Human species have survived and have thrived based on technology changing. The problem is now technology is changing so quickly that a lot of people are like misunderstanding what's happening. It's just that we're moving at a faster pace. But I think also I think especially in the wealthier parts of the world, US and Canada, I think we've gotten past scarcity. And so we're at a point right now where policy is really impacting stuff. It's not actual like production. And so technology changes, I don't think are going to actually lead to massive death of the US and Canadian and UK economies. I think it's really just going to be a reconfiguration. And I think we'll finally get to that point where like the market can start becoming somewhat rational, because it's very irrational right now, because we can start making better decisions with better data.
Correct. Okay, so it's 1:33 and I'm going to try to squeeze in 4 more questions. Like I have more around, I have so many things to talk about. So can AI help in reducing bias and can it promote diversity in the workplace?
I don't love the premise of this question. You know this. I think the premise of this question implies that we don't already deal with bias in many different manners. And I think right now we have human bias. The individual human is going to heavily bias things. I know we've had a massive push the last few years of people understanding their biases. Myself and Leah, like we tend to pat ourselves on the back for being extremely rational people. And so I think that really means that we're very aware of our biases. But at the same point in time, that doesn't make us good at handling our biases. And so I think I want to remove this notion that like AI is going to mean some massive difference in terms of bias being in a system. What I do think, though, is that the models themselves are going to be biased by the data that's going into them. And this is, I think, the fundamental thing to understand about machine learning in general. The inputs beget the outputs. So if the inputs are bad, the outputs are going to be bad. This is what all these influencers and all these media hype people and doomers are talking about. But like they're going to ChatGPT, they're going to something, and they're asking it specific questions, knowing they can get a specific answer back because it's a predictive thing. It's a probabilistic structure. It's not a cognitive structure yet. And so I think will machine learning help with bias? I think your mileage varies in terms of which model it is, right? And like, there's no off-the-shelf models that we can talk about off the top of our heads, except for ChatGPT these days. But like ChatGPT has political biases in it. Sam Altman has been very, very outspoken about the fact that he's not happy with the political biases contained within ChatGPT. And each subsequent version, they're trying to remove a lot of those biases as well. And I think understanding what these biases are is one thing that we can do at the model scale, which we can't do at the individual human scale, or even worse, the mass human scale. So I think as time goes on, we're going to see some models that actually get past the biases and actually have proper data and proper analytics about like what the outcomes truly are. And proper outcomes are then going to be rewarded with the inputs. But I do think when we start removing these biases, moving more to a mathematical sense of evaluating people's statistical sense, I think humans are going to be a little bit shocked by what's coming out. Because I think one of the biggest things I always say is like, actually, there's two things I always say. Like one is that like the plural of an anecdote is not data. And I think humans, we go through life with anecdotes. We by nature, right? Like we're not sitting there looking at the entirety of the world and every single event that's happening and properly collating that and clustering it properly and finding the actual a predictive equation there. Like, no, we have our lived experiences. And so everybody's like has those biases contained. I think with machine learning systems, we can now expand the amount of data that's coming into these, and we can get to the point where inherent biases and explicit biases and even biases that we haven't even really understood yet in human cognition are going to be ruled out because all of a sudden these models are going to be doing it in a different manner. Exactly. And I think like the complexity of being a human can't really be replicated by those systems, which is a good thing in terms of removing bias. But then I think we'll have to come down and have some major conversations at a societal level about like, what do we want to reward, right? Like, I think right now, if we were to take the sum total and let's say that we have a hypothetical data set of every single person's performance and we plug it into a model and we look for model outputs, I think that model is going to reward people who drive more revenue, which I don't necessarily think is the right measure, right? But I also at the same point in time, like what I would say is like who leads to long-term impact for the human species, like you can't really model that. We don't know how to actually, like we don't understand the epistemology of that, much less understand how to capture that data, much less have the ability to even host all that data.
Correct, yeah, okay. Now, I know that you've briefly touched upon this topic already, but just because we are talking about AI in HR and we have a lot of HR professionals joining us today. How will AI change the role of HR professionals and their skill requirements?
I don't want to touch the how's it going to change because I think that's a little bit too crystal ball-y for me. I think in this case, my biases are I'm a startup guy, so like we have very small teams. I'm working at a 35-person company, et cetera. Like that's been my thing. So I don't understand the HR function at the corporate level in the same way that I understand it here. So I don't want to touch that one too much, but I will say I think the skill set that needs to change is really statistical knowledge. And I think this is something that I've been seeing my entire career, where the difference makers, like the really strong HR leaders who I've enjoyed working with versus the not so strong HR leaders who I have not had fun working with, has really been their ability to reason and work around a statistical model. And it's really like understanding the biases of the staff, right? Is it one person who's a problem or is it the entire system that's a problem? And I think like for an engineering leader, it's a much easier thing for me to see because I think we engineering leaders tend to run our teams with an overly analytical way of looking at it. But I think we also tend to have engineering culture baked in, which is like, we don't blame the individual, we blame the system. And we can always iterate on the system. And moreover, we're usually building our own systems. And so we know it's like full of bugs, especially if I'm writing the code. And so I think we're a little bit more, I think we're a little bit less rigid about what performance looks like. And so I think for HR professionals, like having a good statistical base, understanding like Bayesian statistics, understanding how the different statistical biases play into something, that's what's really going to be the difference maker, because then they're going to understand how these good or bad AI models that come off the shelf are actually reacting to real world events. And I think like human judgment, human ingenuity, human creativity still needs to win out. And I think that's the other side of what I think HR professionals are going to move towards. And we've kind of seen this in startup as well, where we moved away from like in HR as an administrative function into people operations is more of like a problem solving function and one about team performance and like the holistic team and holistic cultures, as opposed to like individual admin things of like early jobs that I had when talking to HR was the worst thing in the world. Whereas like now I'm always talking to our people ops people because they're like genuinely like they're my friends, but also like we have such a tight collaboration because we're trying to build a better system and a better engineering culture or a better product culture or a better sales culture, et cetera. And like I think it's a different world in that sense. And this is, again, going back to the evolution of jobs in general.
Yeah.
It's a step up, right? You have to step up. You step up your math knowledge, step up your ability to reason through these things. And I think at that point in time, it also becomes a lot more of a fun job because you're problem solving and you're dealing with people. And obviously I'm putting massive amounts of my likes and dislikes into this answer, but I think overall, it's just going to be that job of HR is no longer going to just be like an administrative, strict person who we make jokes about in Hollywood movies, but rather it's like somebody who's integral in building systems and dealing with people problems. And I think it'll move towards a place where performance coaches are going to be inextricably linked to HR. Right? Like, and really understanding how to solve human problems at the sense of like, this person is going through some marital issue. This person's going through a death in the family. This person's going through having to find a new condo in Toronto, which is probably the most painful of the three. That's a really bad joke. But yeah, like I think it'll be like those sort of scenarios. And I also think that function now exists in venture capital firms and high finance firms and all that. I think that's what we're going to see being moved into every other industry as well.
And it's very interesting because I was reading this BBC article about which jobs that AI won't just take yet. And one of they mentioned three things, but the top two things were jobs that are genuinely creative. And second was jobs that require a lot of interpersonal, like a human to human communication. Those are the ones. And, HR professionals and people who are creative and scientists and engineers, they all come under this kind of a bucket of what AI cannot just take over yet, just because of the so many complexities involved in the work itself.
Yeah, I think like if we go to Agile Manifesto for a second, there's only one part of Agile Manifesto that I really hammer home, but it's people and interactions over tools and processes. Right. I think like this is the thing that's going to, I think, end up pervading because it's going to be the right answer at the end of the day. We're not a bunch of automatrons. We're not a bunch of drones. We're not fungible as human beings. And so we need people who are good at people to handle the problems that come up with human coordination and conflict. That's never going to be solved by an AI until we are all enslaved by some drone super intelligence, which we see in Marvel movies or in real life.
Okay, I'll just do a quick time check with Alicia. Alicia, do you have time for two more questions or just one more question?
Let's start with one. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Okay, so I won't touch upon the. So this is more for everybody, even for my own self. Like, how can we build our knowledge and build a rational thought towards AI?
Ooh, very good question. I think that the first thing has to be education. And I think education is a tough one if you don't know where to start. And I think a lot of people assume that they can go learn about AI without having the foundation of statistics. So to me, like having even a qualitative appreciation of what statistics is and the difference between Gaussian models and Bayesian models. I think like that's a fundamental piece of knowledge that we should be teaching kids in high schools itself. And I think the biggest observation I've made in terms of clear, rational thinkers, and this is very much in my own life, clear, rational thinkers versus people who aren't, is like understanding that past results don't necessarily indicate future forecasts, right? And so like, when we're talking about Bayes' theorem, we're really saying we're building statistical models where with each new bit of data, we update that model, we update our priors, and so then we have a more accurate thing. And so we always have like, we're always inching towards a more accurate model. And I think that's the right approach that everybody should be taking to thinking in general. And where like nothing is set in stone, nothing is fatalized, sorry. And this is what Nicholas Taleb talks about in Black Swan, right? You can't predict future outcomes based on past results. Look at COVID-19. Like, yeah, in hindsight, we can predict some of the stuff that happened, but in that moment in like March 2020, we had absolutely no idea what was going on. It was an unprecedented event for us. And so I think like people have to start understanding that there are things that are going to come up and they're going to be wrong because they're proven wrong, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong in that initial moment. Because that initial moment might require a blunt tool, but as time goes on, you might require more and more of a sharp tool. And the blunt tool we had is probably the wrong tool, but it set the foundation for the sharp tool. And I think we need to get that mentality of saying like, things are always going to be changing, things are always going to be evolving, and we shouldn't be sitting there satisfied that we have the right answer. I don't think in anything on the planet we have a right answer for, except maybe like basic arithmetic. Which I think gravity might change basic arithmetic as well, like and change basic physics. so I think understanding statistics, especially Bayesian statistics, is a fundamental important thing. And I think that the next bit is really also understanding how data is used. And so this is going to be me being a little bit more of a doomer, but I'm shocked and appalled on a daily basis by how much data people give away about themselves. And so this can be something as simple as, actually, let me be a little bit political, but like TikTok. We found out this week, I think, that ByteDance actually has a backdoor for the Chinese government to snoop on US TikTok data, which is something that the ByteDance CEO said to Congress was not actually happening. So like people are actually giving up a lot of data, putting a lot of different pieces in that they're doing it for fun. They're doing it for convenience. They're doing it for ease of life. And really what's happening behind the scenes is that this is just like a nice veneer on top of like a massive data collection scheme used to go influence other things. In Canada right now, we're dealing with the fact that we've seen Chinese influence in our elections. The US, we've seen that with Russian influence in elections. We'll see that geopolitically with what's happening with Taiwan. I was a pretty big proponent for the notion that before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they were sending out a whole bunch of different things to manipulate people on social media to look away from troop movements. And if we think about what was happening in Canada at the time, that's when we had trucker protests. And I remember saying to friends of mine, like, everybody's paying attention to this thing, which is going to get resolved. But like, there's literally Russian troop movements happening on the Ukraine border. And most people missed it because they were too busy focused on this one thing. And now we've seen with House and House of Commons reports that, yes, there was active Russian farms going on. They actively, like GRU operations were actively funding a lot of these troll farms. They have their, they call them convenient idiots, but they have their politically charged people who are effectively crisis actors, but like, it's manipulating data to go understand how to tweak somebody to like vote one way versus the other. Or it's, I think, even more nefarious that we've seen in the last few years in full focus is just putting out a lot of misinformation, right? And it's never like incorrect information. Rather, it's like nuanced enough where you have to go deep enough, then you can find a study that disproves something that somebody's saying. Right. This is where I think people need to get a much better education focus on this. Like, where is your data actually going? Where's that data set coming from? And like, how is that all that stuff being manipulated by corporations, foreign governments, hostile actors? Because now we're going to see, I think, like we're going to see hostile actors who are like terrorist groups are going to move towards digital warfare as opposed to terror tactics, right? Like, and we're going to see all of those things coming up because we've seen those happening at the state level. It's going to come down to like guerrilla groups and all that. And so we're going to get to the point where, and I think as an Indian, and I think you're going to laugh at this one with me, like we have so much scamming stuff going on in India. Like part of that is like, it's a little bit weirdly cultural and it's trying to be mashed out. But I think the tough part is like all this data is available in India. And so the other day, like I was literally in India and I was saying to my mom, don't get XYZ card. She's like, oh, it's so convenient to do this. I'm like, it's convenient, but I'm like, that card data has been leaked so many different times that I can probably go find all of my cousin's information for this other card online because it was like sitting there. And I'm like, the difference though is that we are Canadian. If your banking and vital information is leaked, we don't have 7 layers of bureaucracy to prevent the bank account from being emptied out. Whereas in India, it's the most cumbersome, annoying thing to put money anywhere. Like to do an Uber Eats order, you basically need to go through your entire bank authentication flow, like a pseudo KYC flow. You need to do one-time password to your phone and your email. And this is to make an Uber Eats purchase. And I'm saying this because like a week ago, we were doing that and we were just frustrated that we couldn't just put a credit card in place. Absolutely. But like, when Indo-Canadians are going there and doing all these things for convenience and putting up their vital information, they're thinking, oh, cool, it's stuck in India. It's like, no, that data is going to get leaked and then it's going to get in the hands of the scammer networks that happen there. And then you're going to be getting calls in Canada of people trying to get into your bank accounts. Because India's got this massive wealth of technology and massive wealth of data right now from especially us non-resident Indians. And that's being used to manipulate people in the US and Canada where we have comparatively weak security structures in banks. Leah's probably laughing somewhere around there because she knows exactly what I'm talking about on the side of security structures.
I never thought about that, but my name is on that database too. And I know that database has been breached multiple times. So yeah, but you're right. Carissa mentioned, is critical thinking the common thread here in skills needed for the future? And I think
I think it's a fair statement to say yes. I do think that's a bit of a universal truth though these days. Like critical thinking in this ecosystem, like in our society, is a very, very important skill and one that I don't think enough people have. I do think though we need to be a little bit kinder to ourselves about the critical thinking aspect, because it's now becoming extremely difficult to be like actually critical as opposed to like nominally, right? I think one of the biggest things I learned as a healthcare entrepreneur is that a study is pretty much useless. An individual study is pretty much useless. You need corroboration of a variety of different studies. You need about like 6 or 7 different studies before you can actually say, okay, cool, like let's change standard of care. I think the other thing we'll realize is that like every single experiment we have, or every single observation we have, tends to be more anecdotal than comprehensively data driven. So I think we're going to get to the point where it's going to get even more challenging for even the most critical of critical thinkers to have a really good viewpoint, because the data is hidden from them. And then going back to machine learning models, like I think this is one of the biggest dangers, and one of the biggest things that I lose sleep over is we're going to get to the point where the model itself is going to determine what the truth is. And this, I think, is kind of like what we're seeing in some of these US culture wars, especially like anything revolving around Elon these days and Twitter. I think there's this massive culture war happening, but I don't know if there's an actual right or wrong side at this point in time, because the more I get deeper into some of these things, the more I see that longer term, somebody who is thought to be completely wrong is actually correct. And I think we try to make a justification in a very short amount of time, and like we want immediate feedback. But the reality is like that immediate feedback, there's going to be aggression to the mean. There's going to be something else that happens on a longer period of time. And then the law of unintended consequences comes in place as well, which basically is saying in a complex system, you're going to have a lot of things that are going to happen outside of your control. I think we as human beings overthink or over assume our own ability to critical think. And I think like critical thinking over time is going to be going back to how can we statistically prove this? How can we statistically understand this? And to me, I've adopted this framework of like the only truth that I will hold in the world is mathematical truths. And even then, like we don't really have a good model of gravity. We don't really have a good model of quantum physics. We don't have reconciled models between like energy conservation, et cetera. Like there's a lot of different things that we don't fully understand yet. And these are like the known unknowns. I think we as humans need to just assume that like we're probably wrong unless somebody's literally broken the math down. And then we have to be able to be good at like understanding what that math actually means.
Correct. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay. So the floor is now open for questions. Let's see if you have any questions coming in.
I think there was one above. Would there be a use case for gathering lists of candidates?
All right, there's one question from Karen. Would there be a use case for gathering a list of candidates? Very interested in this, as I'm an IT consultant and most roles I've worked have been because of a recruiter finding me on LinkedIn.
So this is, I'm gonna give a tilr answer here. I think one of the challenges that we saw when we were initially working on things like last January, was we couldn't really build proper skills-based matching algorithms because the data didn't exist. And I think this is also the nuance that I think has really affected tech recruitment over the last few years as well. It's cool to have somebody with something on their resume that says they worked on Postgres, blah, blah, blah. But then the reality is, did they actually do it, right? And so we don't know if that was the case or not. And so I think we still have a major thing to surmount, which is how do we actually verify that somebody's actually done something or somebody actually has a skill? And then how do we verify that skill in a comparative manner, right? Like you and I are both software developers, but our skill levels in different runtimes and different languages is vastly different because we've had way different backgrounds. Yep. And so there's things that you have done that I'm really, really good at. There's things that I have done that you're really, really good at. But I think right now, to a lot of recruiters going through LinkedIn, they might look at us both as heads of engineering and going, oh yeah, these guys can do the exact same job. When the reality is we do very, very different jobs. We have a very different way of approaching those jobs. And I think like knowing you, like we have extremely complementary skill sets, but like going through LinkedIn, you would never know that. I think in recruitment models right now, same scenario is going to happen. It doesn't matter how good that machine learning model is. It doesn't matter how long it's being trained. We don't have the data in place to actually verify the truth here. Going back to like the nominal versus actual thing that I said earlier, like we don't know actually how good somebody's performance is because we just have the perception of that performance tied into like human bias and all that. And typically speaking, people we tend to bias for them higher.
Absolutely.
I think this goes back to recruitment models, right? It's like, I don't think we're going to be able to build this of candidates quite as well. If you look at my LinkedIn, it's completely trolling. There's like, I don't like having accurate things in my LinkedIn anymore because I find a lot of it was status signaling that people were doing. And I was like, I need to be differentiated here by saying, come talk to me about the outcomes that I've actually achieved. Go talk to the people I've worked with and then go figure out if you want to hire me. I think that is like something that we need to surmount. And I think it's just like, this is actually probably something that I probably should have talked about more, but like we need the concept of like merit badges in work scenarios, right? And like, I've long talked about this and I thought this is where NFTs actually had a use case. But like, if somebody accomplishes a project at work, that project's success, et cetera, like nobody needs to know what that project was outside of it. We need to know that somebody could actually pull off a project end to end and was given tons of acclamations. Like to me, it's like we need to build systems where your accomplishments at tilr can translate into what Nautical is looking for, and you can slot yourself into a great role there. And I think that goes beyond building lists of candidates as opposed to like really saying like, how do we, I think we have to flip on our head, like how do we actually find the right set of skills and right set of accomplishments that we need to see for somebody to be successful in this role, or for somebody to not be successful in this role, even for somebody to take our organization to the next level. I think that's the one piece that we need to really figure out. And this is also like going back to my first startup, like this is some of the stuff that we were trying to figure out. How can we actually do like merit badges? How can we actually find a way of verifying that somebody's done something as opposed to just taking the word for it? And like in the midst of this too, like to be blunt, like I don't think reference checks are particularly important because everybody's giving reference checks and they're listing their friends who are incentivized to be friendly and to give them a good reference in that sense, because you're going to go out for drinks later, or you're going to go for dinner, or you're going to go to Mexico and hang out while Leah doesn't put enough sunscreen on. Like it's like those sort of things. And so we haven't incentivized that. I think we have to get to the point where it's like hiring managers should be able to be like, yeah, this person crushed it on XYZ thing, and should be able to translate across the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I really like that. It's very merit based, and it's very transparent.
Yeah.
Rather than
And
just
and I think that this is also like where we get away from biases, right? Like we don't need, it doesn't matter what the individual is doing at work. What matters is the work output. Then we're like reducing biases. It shouldn't be like human characteristics should not enter into any single part of a recruitment cycle, in my opinion, to find the best team possible. It should be, can these people gel together, and can we put the right management structure in place to deal with conflict, deal with coordination? But then we just want to make sure that like the people who are in that group have the complementary skill sets, have the ability to work with one another. And I think then you soften any difficulties around somebody not liking somebody else's personality, or somebody being a bit too politically charged in certain ways, whichever way it is. Like, I think all those things kind of melt away. And we have this scenario where like you come to work and you just do work, but then after that, like we'll have much more time in the day, like this long promised dream of like 4-hour work weeks and long vacation cycles and all that. Like I think we can get to that point, because then it's like, great, humans are coming in, interesting, that creative ingenuity stuff, and now the ML systems are going to handle the rest of it.
Awesome.
I try to tie that off together.
Literally. Wow, this was amazing. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you so much for this really, I would say both in-depth and a broad discussion on AI in our life and AI in the workplace. People on the call, you can follow us on LinkedIn, tilr.com. You can follow Rohan to see how he trolls people on LinkedIn.
Only Leah.
Only Leah. It has been amazing to have all of you join us. Thank you, Alicia and Leah. Thank you for your support and guiding this discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
See you, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right.